much for that. That was really quite something. That last song especially, but the whole thing really, and the what's it called? The flopping shoes, clapping shoes. What's that called? That's really remarkable. I always think that was quite cool to see. If I had shoes like that, I have size 15 shoes. It would be thunderous if that happened. You might be deafened by it. But it was what a pleasure to hear that this morning and to see that lovely style of music. It's so fantastic. Thanks for coming out. I know it's a Labor Day holiday weekend, and oftentimes, you go south, which is where, Nicole and I and my kids are from. We're from the Detroit area, and Labor Day weekend, churches are typically empty because everyone comes up here. And we were wondering yesterday, where does everyone who lives here go? Do you guys go south during Labor Day weekends? Well, apparently you don't. You stay here, because here you are. As I begin, I wanted to just share a story with you. Something that happened. It circulated in the Navy as a true story for a while, but I don't think it's actually a true story, but it helps to prove it, illustrate a point. It was a story of this flotilla of U.S. naval ships. It was crossing the North Atlantic on a very dark, foggy evening. It was cold, very dark, very foggy, hard to see anything. And directly in the way of the flotilla of ships was this light that was right in the path. And so the captain of the lead ship signals over to the light and says, we recommend that you change your course 15 degrees to the south to avoid a collision. And this voice sort of responds and very, very informally says, nah, you gotta move. You move 15 degrees to the north to avoid a collision. And the captain of the U.S. ship's a little bit upset about that and says, okay, he's keeping his patience together. He says, no, this is the captain of the USS Abraham Lincoln. I recommend that you change your course 15 degrees to the south to avoid a collision. Please confirm. And the guy said, nope, you better move 15 degrees to the north to avoid a collision. And the captain's now really incensed, and he says, this is the captain of the USS Abraham Lincoln, the second largest ship in the U.S. North Atlantic Naval Fleet. We are accompanied by 5 destroyers and numerous support vessels. I tell you, you change your course 15 degrees, that's 15 degrees, to the south to avoid a collision, or countermeasures will be undertaken to ensure the safety of this vessel. Confirm. And the guy says, this is a lighthouse, your call. Now the idea, of course, is that no matter how powerful things may seem, no matter how daunting sort of an opposition might be, sometimes if you're a single light and you're anchored to the foundation and everything else is just floating out there, it might seem powerful, but it's just floating. If you're anchored to a foundation, there can be even one bit of resistance to that sort of onslaught of what we're seeing, maybe even in the culture happening. If you're standing anchored to a foundation, even if you're a single point of light, you can stand up and be firm amidst all this. That's what I think is happening in our culture today. I wrote a book, like I said, it's out there in the hallway. It's called Saving Truth, just came out a little while back. And the idea is to address what I think is a growing culture of confusion, where confusion is considered a virtue and clarity is considered a sin. And I'll defend that in a moment for you. That's what's going on in our culture today. Sorry, as my microphone sort of is confused as well. There we have it. So if I can switch metaphors for a moment, I was doing a speaking engagement a number of years ago. I was going actually internationally, but it was in Canada, so I got to drive to it. And I live in the Detroit area, and usually when I go into Ontario, Canada, I fly all over the world, but this one I got to drive to. And I typically take the Blue Water Bridge by Sarnia, or I'll take the Windsor Tunnel, or something like that. But this particular engagement was in a town called Wallaceburg, which is just east of Algonac, Michigan. Now, if you go to Algonac and you cross over the river there to Detroit, to Canada, you don't cross over a bridge. You take a car ferry. Now, when I say car ferry, and you're people from Traverse City, and you're living on the Great Lakes, especially Lake Michigan, when I say car ferry, you think of this enormous boat that can take like 20, 30 cars at a time that can go across the Great Lakes. That's what I think of when I think of car ferry. Don't think of that when you think of this particular car ferry. This was this rickety little white paint peeling off of the sides of it kind of boat that held 2 cars maximum. And when I got to this boat, I was like, how are we going to get across this river? I was waiting for the guy to pull me across like a rope, like Lord of the Rings style, kind of a thing. And I thought, this is just a tiny, rickety thing. But I get onto the boat, and the guy says, don't bother getting out of your car. It's going to be a pretty short trip across the river. You're the only passenger, so just stay in your car. And it was a super hot morning outside, so I thought, I'll definitely accommodate him. So I stayed in my car. Now, I'm horrible with directions. My wife is sitting here. She'll tell you, yes, he's horrible with directions. I can get lost in my own home. I'm that kind of bad. Well, so I'm constantly looking at a GPS, constantly making sure that the waypoint that I have or whatever it is actually telling me the right direction to go, especially since I'm crossing over an international border, and I want to make sure that the GPS actually links up to the system once I get over into Canada. So I happened to look down at the GPS at the exact moment that the boat left the dock. So I didn't see us leave because I was looking down. Because I was in the car and the suspension and the weight of the car absorbed the energy of us leaving, I didn't feel us leave the dock. So I had that vertigo. When I finally looked up, I had that vertigo you experience where you're sitting at a street corner and there's a bus next to you and the bus goes forward and for a moment you're not sure if the bus is going forward or you're going backward. And you had that slight panic, that slight sort of nausea, but also the panic. I might kill somebody behind me. What do you do? What do you do at that particular moment? You look for a fixed point of reference to see if you're actually moving. Because the bus is relative to you, but a fixed point of reference, like a street sign or a building or the stoplight, whatever it might be, that isn't moving, so you have a fixed point of reference. Well, I was in a river. Everything is moving. So the vertigo and the nausea sort of lasted a little longer than it normally would have. It's when I started to spy the distant shore, not too far, but just enough for me to see it getting larger in my field of view, that I recognized we were actually moving. And that's when the nausea and the sort of vertigo went away. The confusion cleared up. Today's culture, with all the things happening, all the questions, think about this. I want you to think about the questions that young people are having to answer and actually ask themselves nowadays. Questions you never would have thought, even 10, 15 years ago, you never would have thought you had to answer. What does it mean to be human? We're actually asking this question. What does it mean to be a human being? With all these movements now to change and enhance human characteristics, whether physical or otherwise, we're actually asking ourselves what it means to be human. That's what our movies are starting to be about. What does humanity really mean? We're asking questions about what does it mean to be male or female? What does it mean to be married? What does it mean? When does life actually begin? When does life actually end? Can we actually end life on our own terms? We're actually asking all of these various questions, and I can go on and on and on. These are questions we once thought were actually immovable. In other words, the answers were settled on these issues, but now we're actually asking them with an increased fervency and an increased confusion. We're actually telling children now that they can say who and what they are. They can determine who and what they are at age 8 and 9, and if they determine it, we can actually chemically help them along and say, you know who you are. Many of you are far older than 8 years old, and you don't even know who you are. How are we going to tell 8-year-olds and 9-year-olds and 10-year-olds, you can determine who you are, and by the way, we'll seal that with you chemically for the rest of your life, and that what's resulting is not a spirit of liberation where we have this sense of we can determine whatever we are and whatever we want to be. We're actually seeing a spirit of anxiety. Children are now more anxious than ever. When you look at the studies, children between the ages of 8 and 18 are more anxious than they've ever been, and they've never had more stuff and more freedoms than ever given to them, and yet they're more anxious. They don't feel liberated. That's why suicide is one of the leading causes of death. In fact, it is the leading cause of death, I believe, for people between the ages of 15 and 30. Why? Because you're telling them, you decide who you are right now. You have that freedom, and you can decide who you are right now. And that is an anxiety-inducing thing. Of course it is. Because we're asking these questions, and we're constantly in flux. We are a society that is in the river, where there are no more fixed points of reference, where we left dry land so long ago that we've actually not only forgotten what it feels like to be stable and on dry land, now that we have our sea legs, we sort of resent dry land. We get nauseous suddenly when we step on that which is firm. That's what's going on in our culture today. Sort of this anxiety reminds me of something that happened a while back. I remember in the 80s, when I was a child of the 80s, and some of you are, and some of you have children who are children of the 80s, can see that. There was this thing, do you remember this phenomenon? It was called Cold War neurosis, where children were waking up in the middle of the night during the Cold War, when everyone was worried that the USSR and the USA were actually going to ignite a nuclear fire across the world by engaging in a nuclear war. There was this thing called Cold War neurosis, where children were waking up in the middle of the night screaming because they had nightmares that someone had turned the Cold War suddenly nuclear hot by pressing a button and everyone was irradiated in a nuclear war. This was happening, and there was confusion galore everywhere. We didn't have any sense of safety or any sense of certainty. And there was this band called Genesis, this 1980s band, who wrote a song called Land of Confusion. And the words were so poignant and so clear and so apt for that day. And one of the lyrics was this: "Oh, Superman, where are you now? When everything's gone wrong somehow, these men of steel, these men of power are losing control by the hour." Could that song not be written today? 30 years ago it was written. These men of steel, these men of power are losing control by the hour. Because what's happening now is that we're suddenly asking questions. We're saying we can be whatever we want, we can say whatever we want, we can do whatever we want. And so we just have this unfettered autonomy, this ability to do whatever we want. And it's caused a tremendous amount of confusion. And amidst all the cacophony of confusion, there arises someone who says, I can lead you out. I can be the one who can lead you out. Follow me, whether it's a woman or a man, whatever it might be. And these men of steel and these women of steel are losing control by the hour. Because we're amidst in a culture of confusion. Now, what do I mean by a culture of confusion? Culture of confusion is a culture in which confusion is considered a virtue and clarity is considered a sin. I want you to think about this for just a moment. If you're confused sexually, you're a hero. If you're confused morally, you're progressive. And if you're confused religiously, all paths lead to God, no one has a clear lock on truth, you're considered tolerant. So you're a hero, progressive, and tolerant. But if you're clear on sexual boundaries, you're a bigot. If you're clear on moral boundaries, you're regressive. And if you're clear that maybe there is only one way to God and there's actually evidence to back that up, you're considered intolerant. Confusion becomes a virtue and clarity becomes a sin. Why is that the case? It's because of this. Confusion allows us to have no bright lines and no borders. We don't have to have anything we could be outside of because everything is fuzzy. It's like walking through a fog. Nothing is quite clearly and distinct, so you can make it out to be what you want it to be. And so you don't actually have freedom anymore. Now you have autonomy. Everything can be at your beck and call. And that's important for us to understand. We're no longer embracing freedom as a virtue. Os Guinness once said that you can judge the health of a culture by how it engages with its chief virtues. And the chief virtue of Western society is freedom. That's why we have movies like The Patriot and Amistad and Braveheart and all these things where guys cry, freedom! And that's the big thing, right? Freedom is the chief virtue of the West. And it is. It actually is the chief virtue of the West. Or at least it was. It no longer is freedom. Now the chief virtue is autonomy. And we think that those two words are synonymous, autonomy and freedom, but they're not. See, autonomous comes from the two Greek root words. The first word is autos, meaning self, and then nomos, meaning law. So when you are autonomous, you are a law unto yourself. That is not the same thing as freedom. See, freedom requires boundaries, and I'll get to that in a moment. But autonomy is a state of having no boundaries whatsoever. You can think, be, say, act, do, believe, whatever you want, in whatever way you want, whatever you want. That is autonomy, but that is not freedom. And why do we have this state of autonomy? Because we are autonomy-seeking creatures. That's what we are of ourselves as human beings. We were that way in the Garden of Eden. We didn't want to be free in the sense of being free to pursue our purpose. We wanted to define our very purpose. Think about the story in the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve were planted in that Garden of Eden by God. He put them there, and he told them the truth. The truth was, you are to be with me. Your purpose is relationship with the divine. And he walks and talks with them in the cool of the day. And he says, there's but one command. The one command I give you is there's a tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Of that tree you shall not eat, because the day you eat of it you shall surely die. Everything else is yours. You have total freedom over everything else. But the one thing you can't do is have the fruit of this particular tree. And they live with that, without temptation. For how long? Who knows? But along comes Satan, and Satan misquotes God. And then because the truth is not truly in Adam and Eve, they misquote God back, and that's when Satan knows, I've got them. I know I've got them now. He says, God knows in the day you eat of that fruit, you will not die. You will become like God. You will know good and evil. You will become like God. And that's when that fruit, which never tempted them before, suddenly tempts them. They suddenly want the fruit. Not because it is the truth, because it is their preference. See, the truth was they were put in the garden to be with God. What their preference was, it was to be God. And so their preferences mattered more than the truth. That is autonomy. That's what autonomy actually is. That's why we're engaged in a culture of confusion. It breaks away from truth for the sake of our preferences. As if to prove the point, in 2016, Oxford English Dictionaries named as its word of the year the word post-truth. Now, the word of the year is something that Oxford English Dictionaries does every year. They name a word of the year, and they take a word. It can be new or it can be an older word, but it's a word that captures the imagination and the fascinations of the culture for that particular year, or maybe for a while now. And in 2016, following the election cycle and all the various things and claims that were happening and going back and forth and up and down and left and right, the word was post-truth. And they define it this way. A culture is post-truth when it elevates preferences and feelings over facts and truth. A culture is post-truth when it elevates preferences and feelings over facts and truth. Now, that's very different than a postmodern culture. Oftentimes, we were responding to a postmodernism, the idea that there was no such thing as truth and is relativism. You know, people would say, well, that's true for you, but not for me. And as long as it's true for you, you can keep it, but it's not true for me, and I can keep my truth. Your truth is your truth, and my truth is my truth. Do you remember this? People talking about there's no such thing as objective truth. It's all subjective. That's postmodernism. And when someone says there's no such thing as objective truth, what's the response to that? It's to ask them this question. If you say there's no objective truth, is that statement objectively true? Because if it's objectively true, then it's false. And if it's false, then why'd you say it? In other words, you can reason with someone who's postmodern. And in fact, that mode of thinking, postmodernism, has begun to die its death. But rising up from the ashes of postmodernism, which rejects absolute truths, has come post-truth. A post-truth mindset, remember what I said, elevates feelings and preferences over facts and truth. So they don't deny that truth exists like a postmodernist does. A post-truth person says, truth does exist, but I don't care. How do you deal with that? You can't reason with that necessarily. How do you deal with that? When they say, I don't care, my preferences matter more. You see, autonomy is more important. We have sacrificed clarity and truth on the altar of human autonomy, worshiping ourselves as God. And it's very difficult then to actually give the truth to a culture that elevates its preferences, its feelings over the truth. Now, how do you actually deal with this situation then? If it becomes difficult to argue with someone like this, and I don't mean argue in terms of having a quarrel, I mean argue in terms of providing sound reasons for the why you believe what you believe and how the value of truth actually should be something we should all value. How do you actually engage with a post-truth culture like this? How do you engage? I think the way to engage is to point out that there are negative consequences to being a post-truth person, to actually engaging in this autonomous behavior. There's negative consequences, very serious negative consequences, but also there's hope. Hope found in truth and truth alone. So all the ills that are befalling society now, whether it's racial tensions or misogyny that's seeming to be popping up every 5 seconds now, to see the sort of the endemic nature of misogyny throughout our culture, sort of sexism, or it's social inequality, whatever it is, these major ills will not be cured by post-truth cultures that elevate preferences over feelings, over facts, and they will only actually get worse if we elevate preferences over facts and truth. We have to point out that consequence, but also provide hope and the way that the truth actually gives us answers to these deep concerns, whether it's social or it's private. You know, we no longer, and one of the negative consequences of a post-truth culture is that we no longer engage in dialogue anymore. Isn't it ironic that when we give each other our preferences, that I say, oh, your preference is that way, you identify as this, or you want to be this, or you want to say this? That's great, you can do that. Isn't it ironic that when we do that, we get more and more polarized? Have we noticed this? That the more we give people their preferences, the more hateful we become as a society. Because here's the issue. When I'm autonomous, and I'm a law unto myself, and preferences matter more, and someone else is autonomous, and preferences matter more than truth, If I'm a law unto myself, and that person is a law unto themselves, and my preferences matter more than the truth, and their preferences might conflict with my preferences. Let's say it's religious, and mine happens to be social, or mine's religious, and theirs is social, and we conflict. We come together in what used to be the civil public square. When we come together, it won't be truth that decides between us, because truth is subordinated to our preferences. Our preferences matter more, and I'm a law unto myself. Who wins in that discussion? It won't be the one with truth on their side. The one who wins is the one who will have power on their side. And that's why we're seeing what I call the Hitlerization of social commentary, where if you don't agree with me, you're Adolf Hitler. Now, careful what I said. I didn't say if you don't disagree with me, or if you disagree with me, you're Hitler. I was saying this: if you don't agree with me, you have to agree with me in order for me to like you. Because if you even remain neutral on a topic, maybe you want to reserve judgment for a while. Sorry, can't do that. You're Hitler, or you're Stalin, or whatever other despot you want to call me. Because if you call me this, then you silence me. That's why if you're on the right, only the left tells lies. And if you're on the left, only the right tells lies. And if you're a centrist, the right and the left are always telling lies. Everyone has become Hitler to us. We no longer value people, and we no longer value truth, and therefore our preferences matter more, and that we use emotional-laden terms and no longer facts to come to the truth anymore. It's become quite a serious problem. It's ironic, isn't it? Because oftentimes the people who say that the Bible is God's word and who want to live by the Bible as the source of all truth and the source of true freedom, they're the ones who are often vilified now as the ones who restrict freedom and the ones who hate other people. If you go to the UN, you go to the UN building and you'll find the most popular attraction for visitors at the UN is a mosaic that's painted. It's a mosaic, a stone mosaic based off a painting by Norman Rockwell, and it's called the Golden Rule. And this mosaic depicts people from various different cultures and different religions standing shoulder to shoulder together in a sense of community. And inscribed right in the stone are the words, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's the golden rule. You ask anybody of any religious stripe, whether they're atheist, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, Jew, doesn't matter. Ask them, what is the golden rule? And they will tell you, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. We think that's some saying that someone said sometime. It was on Jesus' lips in Matthew chapter 7. And it's inscribed in stone. You know how to say, it's not written in stone anywhere? Yes, it is. Quite literally at the UN. That was the ideal. The ideal was to do unto others. And in fact, what ended up happening with that mosaic was it became cracked and was crumbling. How's that for poetry? It became cracked and was crumbling, and because it was so important, the UN paid quite a bit of money to actually restore the mosaic. And when they did, the Deputy Secretary General of the UN, Jan Eliasson, at the rededication ceremony says that this work and the golden rule that it's based upon represents the very core of the work as set forth in the UN Charter. It depicts the world, the difference between the world as it is and the world that we want to be. There's a difference between the world as it is and the world we want. What we want is a world where we do unto others as we would have them do unto us. That's fascinating, because the Bible is at once the very source of disavowal. People say the Bible is this freedom-destroying, bigoted document, and yet it sits proudly, restoratively on the walls of our most important buildings. It's at once the point of disavowal and the point of our greatest hopes. We are quite confused, aren't we? How do we recover that sense once again of caring about each other, about not wanting to be autonomous, but to be free and look at each other? One, it's the consequences when we see the Hitlerization of social commentary, and we see that we're no longer valuing other people. So the first thing I think we need to recognize is that when we engage with people in this post-truth culture, there is a consequence to sacrificing clarity on the altar of human autonomy. And the first casualty of that sacrifice is reason. We no longer engage in reason. We use emotion. We have two separate ways we think about things. Either everyone agrees with everything and we want to be nice and get along with everything no matter our differences, or they're our enemies and we hate them. That's what happens. We have these two polar opposites. I would call, I was at a men's gathering, a breakfast that was for men, and I was offered to give my testimony about how I came from Islam to Christianity. And during that testimony, I talk about the truth of the gospel. I don't really talk about the falsity of Islam. That's not the way I speak. That's not how I talk. I didn't leave Islam because that was false. I became a Christian because the gospel was true. That's why you go to a certain worldview. I can leave something because it's false, but I don't embrace something else because that's false. I embrace this because this is true. So I spent a lot of time talking about the truth of the gospel. And there was a guy sitting in the front row at this particular event, and he was scribbling notes very, very fast, like smoke from the page kind of fast. I was waiting for this guy to burst into flames. But usually that kind of person is one of the first ones to come talk to you as soon as you're done. Or sometimes they're the last one to come talk to you because they want to wait for their turn and they're going to get you at the end, kind of a thing. And I'm okay with that. That's why I do this for a living, by the way. It's my favorite part of this job. Well, sure enough, I close my notes, and he walks up to me, and he says, "Hey, I really appreciated the way you didn't disagree with Islam in your talk today." I'm like, "Well, you didn't get the point exactly, because if I didn't disagree with it, I would have stayed that way and saved myself and a lot of people a lot of pain. But go ahead." He says, "Well, I want to show you something." And if you're a public speaker and someone says, "I want to show you something," it's going to be a long conversation. So he had a diagram he had drawn. And there's a big capital T in the middle of the diagram. He scribbled like a big, bold capital T with a circle around it. He says, "There is the objective total truth. I believe in that." I said, "Good, so do I." I said, "But we don't have all of it. No one person knows all of it." And I said, "I also agree with that, because if I knew all the truth, then I would know everything, and I would be God. I'm not God, so far you and I are in a good footing. I'm not God, and neither are you. So far, so good." He says, "But all of us," and he had these little t's, these little lowercase t's that surrounded the capital T, and they had arrows pointing towards it. He says, "All of us have little lowercase t versions of the truth. They're incomplete, but they are versions of the truth, and all of ours, because they're incomplete, are all equally valid." I said, "Everybody's version of the truth is equally valid?" He said, "Yeah, that's right." I said, "Hitler, Stalin, Pol Pot, Mao Zedong, Idi Amin, I can go on. These men had versions of the truth?" This is what he said to me. He says, "I can tell you this. I don't prefer their version of the truth, because my version's incomplete. I can't disagree with them." Preferences over truth. And I said, "It's pretty safe. No one gets mad at you for saying, 'I don't like Hitler.' No one gets mad at you, and the people who do get mad at you for that probably deserve it. But let me ask you a question. Are you honestly telling me you can't disagree with anybody?" He said, "That's right. I can't disagree with anybody." I said, "Sure you can." He said, "No, I can't." I said, "You just did it." It's a bit of a setup. 16 years as a trial lawyer will help you with that. But here's my point. This is a very, very bright man. A very, very bright man. Very thoughtful, very well read, and he was willing to sacrifice reason on the altar of his autonomy and his preferences. See, his preference was everyone agrees, and we don't do the hard work of finding out if people actually disagree about religious views or political views or whatever. Everyone essentially agrees, so we should just all get along and all these things. That's a nice thought, and it's a nice preference, but the truth is not all roads lead to God. In fact, let me shock you with something. Not all roads even claim to lead to God. Buddhism doesn't claim to lead to God. Buddhism, as Buddha taught it, claimed to lead to nothing. Your goal was to become extinguished. In sharp distinction to the Hindu idea that yourself is actually divine. Your idea is not to become extinguished. The ideal is to become one with the absolute. That's the ideal of Hinduism. Those two things can't both simultaneously be true. You can't respect both by saying they're both right, because you're insulting both, because you're saying, "I don't take either one of you seriously." That's the difference. So a perfectly smart man, thoughtful, and I think even caring man, was willing to sacrifice his reason on the altar of his preferences, that we all just get along. So the first thing to go, I think, in this preference-laden world, we lose our sense of reason. The second thing I think to go is we lose all sense of accountability and human value. It was Protagoras who said centuries ago, who said, man is the measure of all things. Man is the measure of all things. There are no gods above us to give us sort of our rules. We're the ones who measure all things. We're the ones who decide. And if that's the case, then we have no one but us to determine what truth is. Man becomes the measure of all things. Now, that was centuries ago. We're saying this now. Listen to the words of Tom Flynn, a secular humanist writer. This is what he says. Secular humanism maintains that through a process of value inquiry informed by scientific and reflective thought, men and women can reach rough agreement concerning values, crafting ethical systems that deliver optimal results across a broad spectrum of circumstances. That's a fancy way of saying man is the measure of all things. He's saying that through a process of value inquiry, a sort of moral inquiry, and scientific and reflective thought, we can reach and craft ethical systems that cross a broad spectrum of circumstances. We can fix us because we are the measure of all things. But has this wonderful genius of self-actualization actually happened? Have we reached this rough agreement concerning values that Tom Flynn talks about? Rough agreement concerning values. Go to our college campuses today and just ask anybody who's been on the receiving end of those protests, sometimes violent, and ask them just how rough that agreement actually is. Go anywhere else in the Middle East, go anywhere else in the East where the church is persecuted or other people are persecuted as well, and you find all this back and forth and the cyberbullying that happens online right here in the United States, wherever it is, and ask people, just how rough is this agreement we've actually tried to reach? Through our own genius, our own ethical systems and personal values, we're going to do this? We have these little machines, these pocket computers that we call phones for some reason. There's more computing power in this little device than existed on the first rockets that went to the moon. And you carry it in your pocket. It's supposed to be a liberating machine, an autonomy-giving machine. You can see anything you want. You can access any information you want at any particular time. You can call whoever you want. You can comment on whatever you want. How much has this actually helped us to aspire to the greater good of all of humanity, to reach this rough agreement concerning values that Tom Flynn so, I think, cavalierly actually talks about? How has this helped us? You know what it's helped us do? Cyberbully, shame each other or ourselves, result in, I think, sometimes terrible situations, including suicides. Objectify people. We look at people now. Access to horrible images like pornography is more rampant now through these little devices in our pockets than ever before. So now we're actually looking at things we should never look at. How free, how autonomous do you actually feel because of this machine? And we call them names. We say, hey, Siri, and it starts to talk to us. Or we say, Alexa, or whatever. We begin to humanize objects that allow us to objectify humans. And we say we're free? Rough agreement concerning values? Because truth is no longer important to us. We've lost all sense of it. See, we haven't come to the rough agreement concerning values. We've simply come to the agreement that the value we care about most is being rough. Just watch the news. Just watch the news and you'll find out. So we lose that sense of accountability, but because there's no one above us to be accountable to. Yuval Harari said it, a secular atheist Jew, in his book Sapiens. He says this amazing statement. He says that 70,000 years ago, we were scrounging across the earth trying to find something to live off of. But now we're technologically advanced, literarily advanced, all these various things. Yet we are never quite as irresponsible as we are right now. He says we are powerful beyond measure and we are gods of our own making, yet we are irresponsible and don't know what we want. Is there anything more dangerous? Because we no longer value each other. We don't look at a person and say, I know you disagree with me. I know that we're not on the same level with regard to whatever we're talking about here. But can we come together and talk? You see, when you turn on the news, it used to be the civil public square. It is no longer the civil public square. It is now the gladiatorial Roman Colosseum. We wait for our champion to win. And this is true of Christians and non-Christians alike. I'll tell you this, if I see one more post on my social media that says something like, watch Christian destroy atheist, as clickbait, I'm like, so let me see if your atheist friend actually likes that. How are you reaching out to your non-Christian friend when you see that? We have to be careful about how we come off. Do we actually value people, or do we begin to see our enemies as the darkest possible we can see them? So I think there are two consequences. There's a bunch more I go into the book, but the two biggest consequences I think that happen are we lose our ability to reason, and we lose all sense of accountability, and therefore human value. Human beings become these things that are in the way of my preferences. And if you get in the way of my preferences, I will use legal means, or maybe even physical means, to eliminate you. That's what's happening now. But is there hope? Is there a way back? And I think the answer is yes. I very much think so. And I think it is found in the pages of Scripture, the very pages and the very words of Jesus that we love so much, though we hate simultaneously, and love those words so much that we inscribe them on the walls of our most important buildings. See, the culture rejects the Bible and the words of Jesus, often because they think the Bible is this restrictive, arbitrarily restrictive document that says, don't do that behavior, God finds that icky. And we really mean that they find it icky, and they use God to justify their sort of moral outrage. And it's this freedom-inhibiting document, but it's not freedom-inhibiting. The Bible does stand against autonomy, because autonomy leads to chaos, as I just pointed out. It does stand against autonomy, but it does not stand against freedom. The Bible is quite pro-freedom, but you have to understand what freedom actually is. You have to understand what freedom actually is. See, freedom requires boundaries. Freedom isn't just the ability to do whatever you want. We often think that nowadays in the West. Freedom is freedom from restrictions. But the reality is freedom has two sides to it. Is the freedom from restriction so that you have the freedom to do what you should. Not just what you want, but what you should. See, freedom has boundaries. Let me give you an illustration of what I mean. When we first moved into our house, we're blessed with this very large backyard. And I have 3 great kids now, but at that time I only had one, my oldest, Yusuf. I was barely a year old, and when Nicole and I were thinking about buying this house, we realized something. This wonderful backyard happens to abut a major road, and cars and trucks are whizzing by all the time. And we thought, is this really a safe place to have kids? Because what if the kids want to play in the backyard and the ball bounces into the street and the car comes by and whammo, they're done. They couldn't enjoy the purpose of the backyard if there was no boundary. So we set up a boundary beyond which they could not play. This is the boundary. You can't play beyond this. If a ball bounces past this or whatever, you're not to go past it. This is the boundary. Because there was a boundary, just enough, not too much, but just enough boundary, my kids were able to enjoy the purpose of the backyard. They had freedom this way. But if there was no boundary, we wouldn't let them out there because who knows what would happen. Freedom requires boundaries, just enough. In fact, I would even say art. People often say art is boundless, artistic license, artistic freedom, right? Well, even art has boundaries. It was Chesterton who made the comment. He says, even art has limitations. He says, you may think that in your imagination you are free to draw a giraffe with a short neck, only to find yourself not free to draw a giraffe at all. You may try to free a tiger from his stripes, but you will find that you've not drawn a tiger at all. You may think in your imaginative way that you can free a camel from his humps, only to find out you have freed him from him being a camel at all. You may free things from accidental properties, but you can't free things from their inherent properties. When you deal with facts, you deal with limitation. Everything has limitation, even art. Because facts and truth are linked to freedom. They have to be. Otherwise, it's bedlam and autonomy and chaos, and we're seeing it today. So is there a source of freedom? I think it's found in the pages of Holy Writ. I think when you look at a conversation that Jesus has, many of you have read this or have heard it or have studied it quite a bit, but it's familiar to you, but I think it's worth our attention today. You look at John chapter 8, verses 31 to 36. You look at that exchange with Jesus, and it's both profound and hilarious at times. What are the words? Beginning in John chapter 8, verse 31. So Jesus said to the Jews who had believed him, if you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Did you catch that? You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. For Jesus, truth and freedom are linked. The culture says preferences and freedom are linked. Jesus says truth and freedom are linked. That's the first coupling I want you to see. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Their response to him is nothing short of hilarious. It's hilarious. They answered him, "We are offspring of Abraham and have never been enslaved to anyone. How is it you say you will become free?" You're offspring of Abraham and never been enslaved to anyone. Did you forget the whole Egypt thing? 400 years of it. And in fact, you celebrate your liberation from Egypt's bondage every single year on Passover. You have never been enslaved to anyone. And you know when they're saying this? While under Roman occupation. You see what happens when you elevate preferences over facts? You begin to twist the way you look at reality. And Jesus, bringing them back to reality, talks about the slavery that's within, the slavery of human passions, the slavery of human sin. Truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not remain in the house forever. The Son remains forever. So if the Son sets you free, you'll be free indeed. Did you catch it? You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. The Son sets you free. The Son is the truth. He literally equates himself with the truth. He equates himself with it. Now, you can't just say that kind of a thing and let it hang out there. If you say you're the truth that sets people free, you got to back that kind of a thing up. Like, okay, sure, you're the truth. You have to back that kind of a thing up, and he did. The Jewish leaders asked him a most reasonable question. If you look at John chapter 2, they ask him, "By what authority are you doing and saying these things?" And he says, "When you destroy this temple," meaning his body, "I will raise it up again in 3 days." In other words, what he's saying is, it's not a matter of objective feelings if I'm the Lord of the world, if I'm the Lord of truth, if I'm the very source of truth. It's a matter of objective fact. In fact, I'll give you an objective test. It won't be, I will rise again spiritually, or I'll rise again and my message will go over the world. I will rise again physically, he says. You will put me in a specific tomb, and 3 days later, that specific tomb will be empty because my specific body won't be dead. Either true or false, and your preferences are irrelevant. That is a bold statement, because you got to back that up. I did a debate with an atheist named John Loftus. He used to be a youth pastor, actually. Became an atheist, and we did a debate at Western Michigan University where I talked about, I think, the amazing amount of evidence we have to believe as a matter of history, not just hope, but a hope that is born of history, that Jesus actually rose from the dead. There's great evidence for this. And so he rose from the dead. He claimed to be the Son of God who takes away the sins of the world, who is the truth that sets us free from our own sins by paying a price that you and I deserve to pay. He paid it on the cross and then rose again from the dead to prove he was right. And that is historically verifiable. He claims to be the one. He claims to be that one. And he backs it up. See, the culture says that preferences over truth leads to autonomy. Jesus says that truth leads to the true freedom. And he claims to be the embodiment of that truth. All these digital distractions and all the experiences of our lives and all the genius we claim to have won't get you there, but he claims to get you there. We were at Yale University, Ravi and I were at Yale University doing an open forum on the topic of a post-truth culture of confusion. And a bright young guy walks up to the microphones. You know, we do these open forums where thousands of kids sometimes will come to the open forums, and we have microphones set up, and we give preferences to the skeptics. We want the skeptics to ask their questions first. And a young man walked up to the microphone and he says, "You know, I see the link between truth and freedom. You made a good case for that. But can you help me with, how does Jesus form that link? What do I need Jesus for? If I can just have truth that leads to freedom, what is Jesus all about? Can you help to elucidate this and maybe explain, you talk about the resurrection, how does that actually factor in?" It's like, I cannot believe you asked that, because that's such a great question for you to ask. And I get to go on and on about Jesus now. So I did. I said, you've already acknowledged that truth leads to freedom. Preferences leads to chaos, but truth leads to freedom. And by the way, as an aside, let me just tell you this. The number of students who come to these open forums, we were at Yale University where we had the chapel. I don't know if you know this, but Yale was founded by Christians. The chapel was full. 890-something people or something like that filled the chapel. 180,000 people watched it live stream. At University of Michigan, 3,500 people filled Hill Auditorium. At Michigan State University, 9,500 filled the Breslin Center. At Indiana University, a week later, I think it was 3,000 or so filled that auditorium there, and on it goes. And my colleagues have seen it, 7,000 sometimes at some of these events. The kids, the students, are seeing the grisly sort of aftermath, the grisly sort of hangover of a post-truth culture, and they're getting sick of it, and they want answers. They don't come with zingers. They come with answers. They come wanting answers, I should say. They don't come with zingers wanting to zap me. They come wanting the answers to the questions they ask us. And they ask us very hard questions. Well, this young man's question was no exception. He wanted to know where the freedom actually comes from. And I said, look, Jesus makes that claim to be the truth incarnate. And then he backs it up with an objective test of the resurrection. But what is his actual claim? What is the claim of the gospel? What is its claim? Its claim is that you, no matter what you think, say, act, or believe, you are made in God's image. That is a uniquely Christian claim. No other religion says that. Uniquely Christian. You are made in God's image, and therefore you are sacred beyond measure. You're not incidentally sacred. You are not what Lawrence Krauss calls the pollution of the universe. You are inherently sacred. You are made in God's image, but we have strayed from the purpose for which we were created, which was communion with God. And that's why the world is the way it is. But you can be redeemed. There's an equality to each one of us, no matter how smart we are or how dumb we are, no matter how fast we are or how slow we are, no matter how capable or incapable we are of certain tasks. There is one thing about us that is indelible and it's inalienable. It cannot be taken away from you, not even by yourself. You are made in God's image. That makes you equal no matter what anybody says to you. That fact is why God says, though you're all equally sinners, you're all equally redeemable. For God so loved the world, that's everyone, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever shall believe in him, that's anyone, shall not perish but have everlasting life. Your purpose, I said, is to be with God. That is the truth that sets you free. Jesus is the one who made it possible, and so you now have your purpose. Freedom is the ability to do what you want in accordance with what you should, based on what you are. And what you are is made in his image. That's freedom. Let me finish with this and say this to you. As we engage with the culture, and maybe you're somebody here who's needed to hear something like this, and there's this vitriol and this anger, and we're no longer understanding each other. No matter, we don't have to agree, but try to understand each other. There is one who understands everything about you. Everything about you, no matter how misunderstood you felt. Thomas Bracken's poem is so powerful here when he says, not understood, we move along asunder, our paths grow wider as the seasons creep. We marvel and we wonder why life is life, and then we fall asleep. Not understood. Not understood how many lonely breasts are aching for lack of sympathy. Day by day, how many cheerless, lonely hearts are breaking. How many noble spirits pass away. Not understood. Oh God, that men would see a little clearer, or judge less harshly when they cannot see. Oh God, that men would draw a little nearer to one another. They draw nearer to thee and then be understood. The world is looking for not agreement necessarily, but at least some understanding of the struggle. And if we engage by showing them the culture's negative consequences, that the culture doesn't care about your struggle personally, it wants to give you these preferences thinking it's giving you something, but it's really giving you poison. But if you ask, so that the culture's got a problem and its consequences, but the gospel has hope for you and telling you who and what you truly are, that's when we can become understood and the freedom to be who we're meant to be. Sometimes secular bands can write songs that really capture what I'm talking about. Let me close with this. There's a band called Crash Parallel. It's a Canadian band. And they wrote a song called Rain Delays. And it talks about our desire to fulfill our lives with personal meaning and satisfaction by engaging in stuff, by engaging in experiences that we think will lead to something, but they ultimately lead to nothingness, and there's a desire for someone, not something, but someone to actually help us and save us. Listen to the words of this. Sleepless nights and endless days in mini skirts and serving trays, waking up from rain delays, selling sex for pocket change, and living off the alcohol with no one but a cab to call, lost inside a bathroom stall, this carbon copy life withdrawal, and driving cars we can't afford and making sure we're never bored, living off our own accord between coffee grinds and corner stores, limousines and cigarettes, and chasing dreams with fishing nets, and long weekends without regrets. Well, no one here is taking bets. I need someone to believe in, someone to fill this space with grace, to look into my eyes, to touch my face, someone to make me strong, someone to make me belong, someone to make me alive. Not something, not some experience, someone. Since our inception as human beings, we've tried to find fulfillment by elevating personal feelings over truth. And then we've put our faith in things that are neither personal nor true. Jesus Christ is the one, because in Christ and Christ alone, the truth is a person. Let's pray. Father, I thank you for the opportunity to speak about your Son and what you've done in sacrificing him for us and then glorifying him through his resurrection. Spirit, we're so grateful that you've called words to mind, Lord, that sometimes we need to hear. I don't know what people have heard in this audience, because sometimes you speak, Lord, and you translate these things for those who need them in this particular season. I pray, Lord, if there's someone here who has been immersed in a confusion of their own sorts, whether it's a cultural confusion, whether it's a personal confusion, those who have not felt understood and have longed to feel understood, I pray, Lord, that there are those here who come to know you in a way they've never known you before, whether they've been believers their whole life or they've never stepped foot in a church before, and this is the day that they've done it. May they be understood. May they be redeemed, Lord. We thank you for your provision and for all you've given to us. May we not be lights that defy the culture, but like a lighthouse, we exist solely for the purpose of helping to save a culture from destruction. That's what we are here for. We are here to shine our light, not to defy the ships of culture, but to preserve the ships of culture by the light of you that shines within us. May each one of us do this with spirit, heart, and truth. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you so much. God bless you guys.